And Senator, before you go, we want to hear about the Equality Act, the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on it.
Well, I think it was an excellent hearing, and I thank all my colleagues on both sides. And the obvious question is whether or not we are going to prohibit on a federal basis discrimination based on sexual orientation. To think that across America, because of Supreme Court decisions, you can have a marriage in the morning, a gay marriage in the morning, and then be fired in the afternoon from your job because of your sexual orientation. That, to me, is unacceptable because we have such a patchwork of state laws that provide this protection. I just hope we can find one Republican who will stand up and join us to stop this discrimination.
All right, Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Senator Dick Durbin, thank you very much. And now joining us, someone who testified at the hearing on the Equality Act, President of the Human Rights Campaign, Alphonso David. Thank you very much for being on the show this morning. Tell our viewers not only what you said during the hearing, but what you hope Americans will understand about this act.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Mika, for having me again. Yesterday, for the first time in our history, the United States Senate considered the Equality Act and heard stories of discrimination and violence against LGBTQ people across this country. They heard from me. They also heard from Stella Keating, who is a transgender teenager from Washington State, who shared her story about wanting to go to a college and feel valued, no matter what state her college is in. We also heard from Dr. Edith Guffey, who's a minister from Kansas, and she talked about simply trying to ensure that her LGBTQ child is protected under law. For far too long, Mika, LGBTQ people have been denied the same basic civil rights protections that are enjoyed by our fellow Americans. And people in this country are united behind the idea that LGBTQ people deserve protections. More than 70% support the Equality Act, according to a poll released by the Human Rights Campaign yesterday. And in fact, 94% of Democrats, 85% of independents, and 68% of Republicans support the Equality Act. These protections are supported by a majority of adults in all 50 states and by solid majorities across all age groups. So this legislation, the Equality Act, its time has come. We need to make sure that LGBTQ people are protected in all facets of life. And that's what we talked about yesterday, and that's what we are advancing in the Senate.
You mentioned one of the speakers at yesterday's hearing, 16-year-old Stella Keating, and here's some of her speech, questioning why her rights as a transgender woman can be taken away so easily.
Right now, I live in a state where I have equal protection under the law. And as a high school sophomore, I'm starting to look at colleges. And all I can think about is this. Less than half of the states in our country provide equal protection for me under the law. What happens if I want to attend a college in a state that doesn't protect me? Right now, I could be denied medical care or be evicted for simply being transgender in many states. How's that even right? How's that even American? What if I'm offered a dream job in a state where I can be discriminated against? Even if my employer is supportive, I still have to live somewhere. I have to eat in restaurants, and I have to have a doctor. And why am I having to worry about all this at the age of 16? This is the United States of America, the country that I love. Every young person, every person, regardless of who they are or who they love, should be able to be excited about their future.
So Alphonso, can you explain to me how this legislation is different than what the Supreme Court ruled on last year? A 6-3 ruling. A lot of people paid close attention to the fact that Neil Gorsuch and John Roberts both said that if you discriminate based on sexual orientation, that is a violation of an American civil rights. How is this legislation different than that ruling?
Joe, that's a great question. I mean, the Supreme Court held that LGBTQ people are protected under federal civil rights laws. So we're talking about employment, housing, and credit. But the Supreme Court could not opine on federal law that doesn't exist. So LGBTQ people are not currently protected under public accommodations. We're not currently protected in jury service. We're not currently protected in transportation hubs. So for me, as a black man, as a gay man, I could walk into a department store and to purchase a new shirt, Joe, and I could face discrimination and I would no recourse under federal law. I could get into an Uber or into a Lyft and I could be thrown out of those cars because I'm LGBTQ and I would have no recourse under federal law. So what the Equality Act does is it further supports the Bostock decision and protects LGBTQ people in all facets of life. Now, we've heard arguments against the Equality Act. We heard them yesterday, and those arguments are specious. First, they claim that the Equality Act would destroy women's sports, and that's false because we've had Equality Acts in states for decades. Minnesota, Illinois, New Mexico, Virginia, California, and the list goes on. 22 states and more than 125 cities have adopted common sense, inclusive protections for LGBTQ people. All we're asking for is that the federal government do the same.
Alphonso, it's Willie Geist. Good to see you this morning. I think a lot of our progressive audience, people watching today, might be astounded to hear that there are still 27 states, I believe, where because of your sexual orientation, that you can be denied a loan, that you can be discriminated against in places like housing. How does that work practically? How do they vet people and how do they deny people those rights?
So, Willie, I'll just give you an example. We have a couple, LGBTQ couple, looking to purchase a home or rent an apartment. They went and found the perfect duplex for them. And they were shown the apartment. There were no issues with their credit. There were no issues with them actually being processed. When the landlord found out that they had this, quote, unique relationship, the landlord emailed them and said they were being denied the apartment because of their unique relationship. And they lived in a state without any protections under state law, so they had no recourse. And of course, as we know, for the past 4 years, the Trump administration had advanced policies to discriminate against LGBTQ people. So we've also seen instances where people face discrimination, as I said before, in going into retail establishments or going into stores, and they have no recourse. I could, for example, be picked to sit on a jury, and I could be dismissed from sitting on that jury because I'm LGBTQ, and I would have no recourse under federal law. Unless you live in a state that has those protections, you have no recourse. And 29 states in this country do not provide comprehensive legal protections to LGBTQ people.
President of the Human Rights Campaign, Alphonso David, thank you very much.